Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, May 21st, 2025, and today on the Roundup we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week, before we get to those questions, we tell you where we get our questions from, and that is our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. If you subscribe via email, I'll be dropping the link into the chat for the website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe, where you can go to hit the subscribe button and then enter your details, and then you'll get the email version of the newsletter called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. That comes out again Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time if you subscribe via email. We also have a LinkedIn version of that same newsletter. I'll drop the link to that most recent edition in the chat as well, so you can subscribe there. Between the two versions, the email and the LinkedIn versions of the newsletter, those we have crossed the 2,500 subscriber threshold, so we're very excited that coming into NAFSA next week, we already have over 2,500 international educators that are getting the newsletter in their inboxes or in their LinkedIn feeds first thing Monday morning every week. So we've been doing that newsletter for well over 325 editions so far, and now we're on our 319th edition of the Midweek Roundup. So we've been doing these since the summer of 2018, and it's been a real journey that coming up on 7 years this summer and fall that we started the newsletter and the Midweek Roundup. So as this has evolved in those 7 years, we've really had some excellent conversations on some topics every week that are critical to what we do in international education here in the U.S. But we're also welcoming colleagues from around the world in the field of international education, many of which will be gathering in San Diego next week, and it's right over here, up here, there we go, Southern California, right there, San Diego. That's where we'll be starting Monday through Thursday evening, for me at least, attending the NAFSA conference. So looking forward to checking in with all old friends and colleagues you typically might only see once a year at an event like NAFSA. So please do subscribe to the newsletter if you're not already, via email or LinkedIn, both of which are available. Links to the most recent editions in the chat that you're watching now. For those that are subscribing to or listening to our podcast, audio-only podcast, please just go to smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and then you can enter your details there to get the email version. And then follow me, Marty Bennett, on LinkedIn. If you want to search for all the SMIE news fit to share, you can find the newsletter version for LinkedIn there as well. So let's get to our first question of the week. And that is, given everything that's happened in the United States since President Trump took office on January 20th, what should we be promoting to students abroad, given everything that's happening? This all requires a sense of perspective and an ability to be able to stop, step back, and look at the larger picture of what's going on. And there are a lot of colleagues right now that they don't like what they see, because they see a government that is tearing higher ed to shreds, that is basically anything is both international or immigration related, is a hot button issue that covers all non-citizens almost with a very negative brush, when we know for a very, very clear fact that less than 0.3% of international students in the United States, over 1.1 million, less than 0.3% were even caught up in that initial SEVIS termination challenge, most all of which have been reinstated, meaning that they had interactions with law enforcement at any level in the United States, not necessarily any convictions or even anything more than a speeding ticket, or charged with the speeding, whatever it might be. Less than 0.3% of the international students in the United States were caught up in this. So It's caused a lot of uncertainty, caused a lot of fear, but the reality is the numbers were tiny. Though it impacted most of our campuses. And when it does, it's all hands on deck. It's all hands to the pump to do damage control and make sure our students are being cared for. Some of our institutions gave awful advice to self-deport, and as a result, they have left the country and then may not be able to get back in. Whereas if they had stayed, they could have been fined within a month or so. What the folks that obviously, and there certainly were folks in that 4,500, 4,700 that should not have been in that, caught up in that, and had consequences that are life-changing in a few of these cases. And that's the saddest part about this. The students that there was no reason that they should have been in these. Most all of these students should not have been in the situations they were in, and the federal government hasn't taken responsibility for that. They've just changed tacks and started to formalize what they can and can't terminate student visa statuses for, or student statuses for anymore. The most significant troubling part of that we talked about last week is tying a termination in SEVIS to invalidation of their visa status. So that's never been the case or allowed legally before, and that's what this new DHS policy, which is hard to believe it automatically would influence DHS policy or Department of State policy related to visa revocation. Typically, visa revocation is done by the State Department for and this has always been the case, for very unreviewable reasons. That typically it's for security concerns or past criminal offenses or criminal activity that happens before somebody even gets a visa, not typically after the fact, unless it's something that comes up in the course of a student's stay, which again is a microscopic portion when you think about of those 4,700 or so, the greater majority of which had their SEVIS statuses reinstated. Are we talking less than 10 international students that had actual valid reasons why they should have been terminated in SEVIS for criminal offenses, and which aren't regulatory for immigration, but that may have been caught up in this? We've even seen some that were detained. The grad student from Tufts, there was another Iranian student from Alabama that were detained and then have been released. The one from Iran decided to go home, as he largely so felt his treatment was unfair, and as would the student from Tufts, who was taken off the streets, taken to detention centers, and had all these issues. Those that were detained obviously are the high-profile ones, or the ones that get the most press, and even those have been determined to be fraudulent. In terms of not fraudulent, the students were fine and they were cleared of charges. That the grounds for the cases that the government had brought for deportation were largely made up or unsubstantiated when push came to shove in the courts. And as we've said repeatedly over the last couple months, the courts are what are going to save international education, save even higher education in general. But given all of that, all of the noise, and the ability to step back and realize what is happening in the macro level, we see the real issues coming down to visa approval rates this summer. Visa appointment availability this summer will determine the make or break of U.S. colleges' recruitment efforts for this fall. And we're experiencing something quite remarkable at my institution. We have 100% of our Chinese students have had their visas approved so far, knock on wood. We've yet to have Indian students, which are the lion's share of our I-20s issued, actually go for appointments yet. So their appointments might be further down the road. So we're closely monitoring the situation, but so far so good for us. So we'll see how the summer pans out. It's still obviously way too early to tell, as we're just now coming into peak visa season. But what should we as a country be promoting, and individual institutions be promoting to students abroad? Wherever possible, we should be promoting our current student experiences, and they are the ones closest to living the life that future students want to live, and that's always always where our attention should be directed, given that future students want to know what it's going to be like for them to be a student on our campuses. So when it comes down to how we promote our individual institutions, promote the U.S. as a destination, it's always the most valid and acceptable way to do so is to use your current students in that process. But in terms of the values we should be promoting, in terms of what the U.S. Still is considered the best destination in terms of quality of institutions from top to bottom. Certainly there are institutions at the bottom that no one would really want to attend if you're an international student, but the greater majority that do are easily accessible, that are desirable. And this is coming from an INTED blog this past week that makes a few key points. That U.S. degrees remain desirable, that international students are increasingly pragmatic and they're focused on outcomes, and that career support is a differentiator. The challenge is we need to be focusing on these, having current students tell our stories in terms of what the on-the-ground experiences are like, but also having the data and anecdotal stories that recent graduates can tell. That you can have a list of employers that have hired international students on your campus in the last 2 to 3 years. That you can have average starting salary data that you can share with prospective students. Because that ROI has become the most important factor, along with career support, that future students, and particularly future students' parents of undergraduates, are considering most highly when they make decisions. That rankings is much less important now. That ROI and outcome career services are rising to the top. And for international education, that's more important than ever before. So the INTED blog article certainly makes a really compelling case for why and what we should be focusing on in our recruitment efforts for international students, and the messaging that makes the most sense, and who the folks are that should be telling your story. A second reason why it's important to leverage your current students is something called the data that there are. We talk about how our current students, how our recent alumni are our best recruiters. And in the United States, they are. And in North America, in more general terms, our institutions generally tend to score higher than most on a 1 to 10 scale for the how likely that they would recommend their institution to a family or friend. If you're familiar with the International Student Barometer that's put out, it's been going for many years now, since 2018, and actually it's been around for much longer than that, but since 2018 we talked about with the INTED blog how important employability and outcomes are. That since 2018 the ISB had found that employability is a top concern for university students, and those are the ones that are there. And feeling prepared for a career is strongly correlated with student satisfaction. And satisfied students are naturally more likely than neutral or dissatisfied students to recommend their institutions. So it's called a Net Promoter Score that the ISB puts out. And it includes the latest wave for our ISB. It's done every year, formerly done by iGraduate, now called ETIO. The latest wave generated 192,000 student responses, including 122,000 international students studying at 155 institutions in 24 countries. So probably one of the largest studies you'll ever see. And this is of currently enrolled students. And future career impact, as ISB has pointed out, matters most, and that the students that are most likely to support their promotion of their institutions are the ones that they have the highest career satisfaction or preparation for careers from their institutions. So that happens more at U.S. institutions, and Canadian institutions are also included. North American institutions are included in this. Why is that? And I think we see this in the United States as this is how our campuses are built. We are a full service entity. We do not have just academic departments where students go take classes and then they go home every night. We have campus environments that are full service, every level of engagement, living, learning, playing, eating, advocating, speaking, entertaining. All of these things are part of our responsibilities we see in the United States. And we have residence halls that are purpose-built. We have apartments that are purpose-built for our students that are easily accessible for our campus communities. That does not exist at most universities outside the US and perhaps Canada. So as a result, we have students that are more plugged into our campuses and have more allegiance to our campuses because they experience life from the very beginning holistically, and their entire lives centers around that campus, an on-campus job that they have, student organizations that they're participating in, weekly events that they go to, sports, club or intramural sports that they participate in. All of that happens within that campus environment or the surrounding community. And so there's much greater connectivity, buy-in from international students that are attending our campuses. And as a result, if we're doing our jobs well and have focused sessions for currently enrolled international students that help prepare them at the end of their, hopefully at the beginning of their journey, they're made aware of these services, and that towards the end when they start looking at internships and then jobs preparation and graduation and all that, they have the full range of services that are available and customized content for them as international students. Where that happens are the students that are obviously the most satisfied with their institution and the support that and preparation that they're receiving for that first job after they graduate. So that great data from ISB and then the INTID article that really support that. Now, let's shift gears and talk about a particular destination market that has been on the radar for U.S. schools for decades, and that is China. And the question is, does the U.S. have a China problem when it comes to recruiting students from there? And this is the case that we see. We've seen it. We saw it in the first Trump administration. We certainly saw it during COVID when China was really starting to kind of retreat and go into its shell and kind of withdraw from the world a bit and shut their doors to almost everybody for a good 2 to 3 years. They're coming out of it. They've become more price sensitive. They've become more regional focused. They're exploring a greater range of destinations. We've talked about all of these trends over the last 3 years. So our problem with China as a country right now is the political realities between our two nations. There were huge tariff increases for Chinese goods that the Trump administration put on. Then it took them down a couple weeks earlier. There have been 2 states, Texas and Florida, that have prohibited public institutions from partnerships or funding students from China. You now have my state, Ohio, passing SB1 late last year that restricted, or earlier this year, that restricted or required all institutions to have certain safeguards in place to prevent espionage on the part of any partners we might have in China, with faculty coming here, researchers, students, whatever they might come here, and then take information back. So that was even warranted a warning from the Ministry of Tourism, not the Ministry of Education, but the Ministry of Tourism, that Chinese students should be wary of, and not necessarily avoid, but be extra careful. And that had some very real consequences. It put the kibosh on a new partnership that we were going to be adding on to something we're already doing with one of our partners. It is impacting our institution. Is being very cautious with any new partnerships in China now. So this is something that is a very real issue in terms of the U.S.'s ability to do at least institutional partnerships that are more highly scrutinized. Certainly on the research level, and in particular sensitive STEM programs, visas for those kind of individuals to come here. That have ties to the civil military fusion strategy that the Chinese government has had in place for a number of years. All of these are particular challenges that U.S. institutions have when considering China issues. Now, how about their students? Students that are Chinese students that have traditionally come direct from China to us for undergraduate study, which had been the majority, and also graduate studies, which has always been consistent. And in fact, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, graduate Chinese students were probably about where Indian graduate students are in terms of a percentage of the students from that country coming. It was probably 75-25 or 80-20 at one point. But since then, there was a time in the mid-teens where Chinese undergraduates were actually surpassing Chinese graduate students in the U.S. And now we've reverted. We've started to lose the gravy train since even before COVID. Probably 2017-18 was the peak, and numbers have continued to drop from China for undergraduate students studying here. But graduate students have begun to rebound, and that's certainly what we're seeing at the University of Akron, is a rebounding of Chinese graduate students. But the reality is we have issues, and thank you, Al-Haji, for that comment. Appreciate you being on with the comments for this section. There are a couple of articles here. One is from one that covers student finishing his undergraduate studies in China, who's looking at graduate education, and he wants to do gaming, software gaming, and he's considering the U.S. He'd been kind of a little bit leery after changes from the government and termination of for CVIS statuses and all that, and not knowing the full story. He's like, okay, but he did make the decision that he wants to come anyway. He's ready to adapt to whatever changes overcome. And that is something that we hope and pray is what the majority of Chinese students that are considering the U.S. Take to heart, is that we really are a country that does value their presence and can really accommodate them on a lot of different levels. Now, the other story is from University World News, and that takes a look at a BOSA survey. BOSA is the Beijing Overseas Study Service Association. That comprises about 60% of all Chinese students studying abroad go through BOSA agencies, and they covers about 300 agencies in China. So their survey, a recent survey, is suggesting that they are shifting Chinese at least those going through Chinese agencies are shifting away from the U.S. in favor of the U.K. That they're seeing that some of the policies that the U.S. has, the tensions persist, that there's potential that the Chinese government will further discourage students from studying in the U.S. Through early warnings, publicity, and guidance. I talked about the one thing on April 9th that the Ministry of Education, it was actually tourism, it wasn't education, that issued that warning. You see what some of the things that are happening. The expense is, as I mentioned, they're becoming a bit more price sensitive. They're looking more at Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam are all attracting Chinese students. And there's even some talk, and I just saw something in the paper today that Duke Kunchun is now, some senators are actively advocating that Duke should shut down their campus because of fears of the civil-military fusion issues that exist. And we have now something where I think there will be a period of adjustment. I think it's never an all or nothing thing with China. They always seem to come around when the reality is, and I think that we saw that happening with some of the political issues that and the tariff issues that got resolved, and the ratcheted down of the tensions. All of those things are happening. Interesting to see that the UK, according to that BOSA survey, seemed to be the one destination that might be improving, of the big four at least. We know that Chinese students are considering a much broader range of countries anyway, but certainly we'll see where that goes. Now, the final question of the day is one that, coming off the BOSA survey that said the UK is becoming a more popular destination again, is that we've also had this past week the UK government's white paper on immigration that has certainly upset the apple cart amongst my British colleagues, and includes a wide range of new unexpected changes, perhaps. Maybe not all of them are unexpected, but certainly raise a lot of questions as to what's next and how some of the changes that were being proposed are going to be implemented. So we'll see what that looks like as things develop, as the dust settles, and we start getting some more clarity from the Home Office, from other areas in the British government that are going to be implementing these policy changes. But what the white paper recommended, one of the first things and probably the biggest headline grabber, was that the graduate route, which has previously allowed international graduates of UK universities in the UK, be allowed to work for 2 years after they're done with their studies. As a separate visa category, step up after they finish that, called a graduate route visa. This has been a kind of political football over the years. Back in 2012, the graduate route or post-study work option was taken off the table and wasn't implemented again until 4 to 6 years later, and now is being changed from 24 months down to 18 months. So that's being seen already as a disincentive in certain countries to consider the UK. Most particularly in South Asia, where there's a huge interest in post-study work anyway, and that changes to that. Those policies can really negatively impact demand for those considering a study there. The other two articles related to this are all three from the PIE. One that talks about South Asian students and their shifting interest perhaps as a result of this change in the graduate route. The other one is the Immigration White Paper, 10 Unanswered Questions. Questions mostly on timing. When will these changes be implemented? There's also a new requirement that all institutions will have to use the AQF, the Agent Qualifications the Agent Quality AQF, Agent Quality Framework, that there are going to be compliance requirements for institutions sponsoring international students will be tightened depending on visa success rates, that there's a new improved English language requirements that are going to be put in place as well. We don't know what that's going to look like, that the Prime Minister has indicated that enforcement will be tougher than ever and migration numbers will fall, as international students are counted in British migration numbers. So there's a lot of negative feedback that's come out of this white paper, and as the dust will settle, I'm sure I'll be tapping some of my colleagues at NAFSA next week from the UK to find out where their thoughts are on this very important topic. But we see a lot happening that is cause for concern in the UK. We saw it last weekend with Australia and Canada, and obviously what's been happening in the US. So we're dealing with very much a changing landscape for the Big Four, the talk of it now being the Big Ten in terms of destinations, top destinations. So we'll see where this all shakes out. But there's even something I saw earlier this week, it might have been a dream, I'm not sure, but that the UK has agreed to give domestic student tuition rates to EU students, which has, post-Brexit, was one of the biggest challenges in EU enrollments in UK universities dropped through the floor. This might be one way back to recapture some of their international strengths, and certainly numbers will probably improve back to the UK, but they obviously don't have the work mobility that existed pre-Brexit. So we'll see if that has an overall positive impact. It probably will. If that is real and if it's not a dream, we'll find out next week for sure. But certainly looking forward to having these conversations with you all next week at NAFSA. So until then, we look forward to chatting with you live from the expo floor on Wednesday next week. But until that time, I wish you all the very best. Cheers.